Today's episode is brought to you by MRC, a branding studio hailing out of Raleigh, North Carolina, where they focus on crafting killer design work for clients that love uber creative solutions for companies small and large. You can find and connect with them online at mrcraleigh.com. That's MRCRALEIGH, and at MRC Raleigh on Instagram. The good news is, if you find yourself reaching out, you'll most likely get to chat with yours truly. That's right, it's My Little Branding Co., and we're here to make your brand or idea look amazing. So let's connect.
Recorded at the Kitchen Studios. This is the Pencil Pushers Podcast.
Welcome, folks. This is the Pencil Pushers Podcast, and I'm your humble host, Mike Rosado. Today, we have a very special episode where we invited my good friend Dameon Williams back to the podcast, along with fellow illustrator Josh Lewis, as we discuss their new creative collaboration marking the 100th anniversary of the Tulsa Race Massacre. If you're not familiar with the incident, well, you're most likely not alone. It's an unfortunately darker part of our American history where an entire thriving black community was attacked by its fellow citizens. A part of our history that I knew nothing about just a few years back. Beautifully illustrated, the 6-part series told on Instagram alone is a great reminder of the powers we artists hold in helping us all better understand the human condition, heal our wounds, and bring us closer together. Join us as we discuss how the project came to be, what the story meant to them individually, and what they hope the project will spark for the future. I really enjoyed my time with them, and I hope you will too. So sit back, relax, and enjoy our chat with Dameon and Josh. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to welcome two special guests on the Pencil Pushers Podcast. We've got my old friend Dameon Williams, who we've had on the podcast before. Good to see you, brother. How are you?
I'm doing well, man. Thank you for having me again. I appreciate that.
Yeah, man, absolutely. So Dameon here is with us, and as well as his recent creative partner, Josh Lewis. How are you doing?
Doing all right. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, man, very, very excited to talk to you guys. So the reason that I'm pulling you guys in to have a chat with me today is because you guys partnered on a project that I thought was really compelling. I thought it was very inspiring in a lot of ways, not just as a topic, but also as an illustrator, as an artist myself, and trying to find my way and striking that balance between doing what we do as artists, as illustrators, particularly illustrators / designers, that balance of doing work for maybe sort of like the more consumer-centric type stuff, and also using our superpowers to do some good in the world as well. Mm-hmm. And the project that you guys worked on, and I thought it was really brilliant as a way to get it out there through social media, but also the way you guys executed, which was fantastic. And it was a social media mini-series on a very important topic of historical significance in America in particular. It's the Tulsa Massacre that happened. I guess we're celebrating the 100th anniversary, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, I guess it's the centennial for that.
Yeah. Dameon, why don't you start off telling us how you guys met?
Okay. It was Creative South, right?
Yeah, that's correct.
All right. So we went to Georgia, where I reconnected with a friend of mine. You may know him, Mike. You would be that friend after years of
That's
of
right.
not seeing you since high school. Met a whole slew of people, and Josh was one of those awesome creative folks. I got up with and met and felt like, well, yeah, I dig this dude's stuff. I've seen this stuff before I knew who he was or officially met him. Great guy, great illustrator, great all these things. And we met. It was in passing, and we said, hey, you know what? Next Creative South, maybe we'll room together. We'll see what happens.
Famous last words.
Yeah. Then there was a pandemic.
What?
We had ever.
Oh yeah. You mean a small little thing like that. That messed up. That gummed up the works. But lo and behold, he brought up an idea he had because of some posting I did that had to do a little bit with history and some things that maybe you did not know.
Just if I could jump in, so you had been doing this for quite some time now, where you were using your platform on Instagram.
That's correct.
To talk about historical stories, typically having to do with race relations.
Yeah. One particular was ABCs of February. I would do every February. It's been 4 years now, and I would literally grab African Americans and from A to Z. Have a person talk about a person every day and have an illustration to coincide with just a little blurb on them, maybe some stuff folks didn't know. And I primarily used Instagram as my platform of choice when it came to doing that. And like I said, it's been 4 years of it, and just dishing out history every now and then. That was my way of just, doing a little something. Mixed in with all the little fun I have on Instagram. So that's...
Yeah, now you were a history buff of sorts in general, so you had a passion for that, right?
Right. It was already in me, and you run across, as you get older, you find out that maybe we weren't taught everything we should have been taught in school. It's funny. School is funny like that. But you know what? We learn every day, and I felt like, well, some of this stuff is really major. I should see if other people have heard of this. If they haven't, well, you know what? Let me share. So, a little research and mix that up with a little illustration, and you got some Instagram fun, and it's done me well. A lot of people, it caught a lot of folks' eye, and I think Josh was one of those folks, and he'll tell you.
Yeah. So, I mean, Dameon and I met and kind of bonded over art, and we both have children, or a child on the autism spectrum. So we were talking about that. And then that led into, we both love history and American history. And, like Dameon was saying, like a lot of, history is hidden, especially the not so glamorous stuff dealing with race. And America has not been kind to those that are different or outside historically. And so I saw, Dameon's projects over the last few years, and I had been using Instagram too to do a project called Bite-Sized Books, which were basically just children's books on Instagram using the carousel. And we had talked about doing a team up earlier this year, and then the Tulsa Race Massacre anniversary was coming up, and I'd only learned about it 2 years ago, and I think that's the case for a lot of folks only within the last few years. It wasn't the only incident that happened at that time, but it was the biggest. So I hit Dameon up and said, hey, maybe we should do what we've been talking about and give this as a trial run. And so it was kind of like the mashup of Dameon's ABCs of February with my Bite-Sized Books. So I think we'd both been dabbling in how to tell stories on Instagram, and then it was just this, powers combined team up, like Captain Planet back in the day.
Now, did you approach Dameon or the other way around, or for this specific project, or what happened?
Yeah, I approached Dameon just because we had listened to this podcast, American History Tellers, which was just great at getting a lot of the facts and putting you at the center of it. So, but like we both said, we had been talking about doing a team up. This was just kind of like, this feels like a natural, organic time to try something out. Yeah.
Were you racing against time, or did you have plenty of time to plan out? Were you like, oh my God, the anniversary's in 3 days, or what was the scenario there? Did you guys have some decent amount of time to plan it out?
What
we did.
What was it? Was it a month and a half? How long had we?
Yeah, it was somewhere between 6 to 8 weeks, and we plotted it all out.
Okay.
And
you had plenty of time. Good.
Plenty of time.
Right.
But we originally thought, well, we'll do 3 or 4 posts, and everything that we were talking about doing was really act 2 of the story, which was talking about the events of the day. And so once we talked about it, we realized you kind of have to talk about what Greenwood was and why it was this special community and the racial tensions and the economic tensions at the time. So you really have to set up so that we actually care about Greenwood and it's not a stat. And then after the massacre, that wasn't the end of the story. They actually rebuilt. So we started plotting it out together, and it was like, oh, I think this is 6 posts. And that's when it started getting a little race against time. We were just trying to cram it in at the end, even though we did plan ahead.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So let's dive into this because as you noted, Josh, you only discovered this story about 2 years ago. I'm not that far behind. I probably discovered it through somebody sharing about it on Facebook maybe 4 or 5 years ago. And I can't remember if I was more shocked about the incident or more shocked about the fact that I only knew about it 4 or 5 years ago. So let's talk about it with the assumption that there probably are a lot of people, number one, that haven't seen your series yet here, which you, by the way, I'll go ahead and note this so you can watch this while we're actually doing this at the same time while we're talking. You can go to @Dameon_Williams, and that's DAMEON _Williams, as well as @Josh J. Lewis, and that's LEWIS. So let's dive into the actual incident itself. Can you tell, go through it, take a few minutes to kind of walk us through, if you don't mind, what exactly happened, and then we can take it from there.
Yeah, Dameon, why don't we just go through, like, you do the setup, I'll do the middle, and then we can talk about the kind of like how we wrote. How we wrote the series.
We'll buzz through it. So we kind of start out with the trail. We start out with Trail of Tears. We have a lot of native, indigenous folks in the United States that have to shift from the east to the west, and with them you have a lot of African Americans, a lot of black folks with them. Some were enslaved, some were free, but you had way more than really any history book tells you.
And was this coincidental, by the way? I was curious about that when I read through the series. Was that coincidental that they were both, that you had the Native Americans that were displaced, and then you also had the freed slaves that were, kind of maybe trying to, find their way, as it were, or what?
It was a little mixture of both. From what I read, there were some folks, some people that felt like they wanted more of a all-white nation, or at least areas in the South for business sake. And they felt like when you have these two different races next to each other, it's just nothing but trouble. So if they want to just mosey on to the west and get out of our hair, then fine, great. And so, it was a little coincidence and some a little bit orchestrated, but either way, it's a bunch of people that they did not want hanging around, so they didn't mind pushing them out to an area they didn't think much of, which was kind of the narrative of this whole Greenwood, the beginnings of Greenwood in that area. So you have a lot of folks out there, a lot of black folks that come together, feel like, for the first time we don't have anybody controlling us. We can, laying out here, plots of land, it's practically cheap. Let me just go and let's get together and let's build a little something. And you had a lot more people come out there because they felt like, well, I'm not getting anything from the East Coast. If anything, the South is just way too deadly for me. I just need to get away from and start over. And going out west, in this case Oklahoma, allowed them to do that. So you have small communities that end up becoming larger towns and larger areas, and you essentially have enough folks to come up with what becomes Greenwood District and what was known as Black Wall Street. So and just that whole area. You have just all.
It was 40 acres, is that right, or was it beyond that?
In the beginning, it started like that, and it kind of spread out. I forgot how large, Josh. You remember?
It was like 40 plus street blocks total once the massacre happened. So it had grown pretty large on the north side of Tulsa, like many of these communities back in the day, across the railroad tracks.
Right. Right.
So.
And essentially, they started to thrive as a result of this.
Yeah. They you had the south side of Tulsa, which was primarily white, and the north side, which was primarily black, and you had so many of the people, the black folks, that were still working for a lot of the white folks, but then they would go back home to their own little area, and the money they would make. And of course, at this point, we had a huge oil boom. Oil was being tapped all throughout Oklahoma. So everybody was doing very well for themselves. And so you had a lot of that money going into the black district and that area. And we said, circulating 19 times before it left out of Greenwood. Yeah. So that's a lot of wealth you're building. And you had everything you could want in that general area. You had your barber, your theater, your dry cleaner. You had everything you could possibly want. So you really didn't have to leave other than for work.
We've established the fact that this became a highly successful community for Black Americans, and they were really starting to thrive.
Right.
And I think what I was reading in the series is that there started to become sort of there was essentially a downturn in the oil industry, and that started to spark sort of the race divisions that were being created at that point, in addition to the film Birth of a Nation, that started to amplify and energize this, I guess, fear and division, right?
Right. Especially when you had the downturn with oil. Not to mention, you finished a world war, so a lot of people were coming back home. And that meant, whether it was homes or jobs, you didn't have you had way more competition, is how some people saw it. With that competition and just already the air of, at that point, a very strong white supremacy, because the Klan was definitely making a run at that point, a strong run. You were setting up a scene for something that it was going to happen no matter what. From what we can tell, what we were reading with the research, you needed something to spark it, and any little thing was going to do it. And you had already a lot of the jealousy and people looking across the tracks, literally looking across the tracks and seeing how well-to-do all these black folks are doing. And it angered some folks. I guess you could say they were a little pissed off, maybe a lot pissed off.
And at the same time, Tulsa had established itself as kind of a lawless town, that there were, there was I can't remember exactly, but there was a white man that was lynched, and
that's right.
And the police really didn't handle that all that well, and they were overpowered, and so you kind of have a lot of that. So you kind of have people knowing that they can get away with.
A white man was lynched?
Mm-hmm.
They were pretty lawless. That was just to show the point that it really didn't matter who it was, but especially if it was a black person, they were definitely in more trouble than that. So.
And and I think what I was reading in the series as well is that there was an incident specifically that sort of took it over the edge, right?
Right. Yeah. So there was a black shoe shiner who would go into Tulsa, and he actually, like many folks, did really well for himself, and it was the May 30th of 1921. He needed to use the restroom, so he went to a building downtown. It was kind of a little bit of he said, she said, and obviously sensationalized later. What likely happened is he tripped, or when the elevator jerked, he accidentally stepped on the white elevator operator named Sarah Page, her foot, and she screamed. And of course, there's white business owners there, and all, like we're saying, like all of this Birth of a Nation and KKK really demonized black men, and so he gets concerned. Sarah Page says something, I can't remember exactly what, about what happened, and the shop owner calls the police, and so the next morning the police find Dick Rowland and put him in the courthouse for safekeeping upstairs because they knew something was going to happen. Sheriff McCullough is the guy who is guarding him. The Tulsa Tribune ran an article that afternoon that basically sensationalized the story, basically saying that Dick Rowland attacked and tore off part of Sarah Page's clothes, which just was not true.
Right.
And so people were reading that, and then hundreds of people, white folks, started going downtown Tulsa around the courthouse. And of course, this is before all social media, so it's just word of mouth spread. And McCullough was trying to stop everybody and saying, you need to go home, but that escalated into a crowd of thousands. I can't remember, like 2,000 plus, and
it was was it a combination of the two communities kind of clashing at this point too? Because I think the people from Greenwood were basically trying to protect themselves at this point, right?
Right,
and also protect him.
Right.
Yeah, so that's the next part, is that we have a guy named Obi Mann and a bunch of other former World War I soldiers. They're veterans. They know the history of Tulsa, that it's a lawless town, and they're like, if they can't protect a white guy, they're not going to protect Dick Rowland. So they weren't going to have anything of it as trained soldiers. So they go down to the courthouse to make sure that Dick Rowland's going to be safe. And then there's a lot that happens over the course of that evening, but it led up to a little skirmish between a white and a black person and a gunshot. No one knows exactly who. Didn't matter, but that's when all hell broke loose. There's an incident there where 12 people were left dead. And then the white folks just left and went to Greenwood. And but the black community actually defended itself through the night, and they didn't get across the tracks until early in the next morning, which is pretty remarkable. But I think a larger crowd happened, and I think around somewhere between 3 and 5 a.m., I can't remember exactly when, a train whistle goes off, and all the white people go in, a lot more crowd, and like surrounding towns came in to fight, and so then they were just rounding up the black community, and if they resisted, they were shot, and then they pilfered everything, silverware. They took pianos out, put them on the streets, just ransacked the whole place, and they were taking the black community and putting them into internment camps, so literally like walking them down the street, which left them defenseless. And then it gets crazy. Then there's like airplanes. I think there was a dozen, right, Dameon?
Yeah,
something like that.
But 7 to 12 planes.
Yeah, that started throwing homemade bombs. They just lit on fire and then dropped them onto buildings, and they just started burning Greenwood. And
this happened pretty quickly too. I mean, didn't it? It seemed like right.
So it started the night of the 31st, and then June 1st is when all of that. I left that out, sorry, but June 1st is when all that happened. So I think the whole skirmish was about 18 hours, and it left 35 blocks completely burned to the ground. It was just
unbelievable.
And there was thousands of businesses. I can't remember, anywhere from 8 to 10,000, depending on the reporting.
Right.
People left homeless, millions of dollars left in property damage, and no one from Greenwood their insurance was never paid, and no one from the white mob was ever held accountable. for that. And so that's what's heartbreaking, is that it really put a lot of folks out, that were there. Not only did they lose about 300 or so people, there was a lot more injured, and one of their prominent doctor, A.C. Jackson, was murdered. And so it was tough. It's a tough situation. So
it's crazy to think that. I mean, I don't want this to turn into. This could easily turn into 2 or 3 hour conversation. So maybe I'll avoid some of these other questions here, but I am curious to get your thoughts on, looking back on this now and doing all these, I'm sure, were hours of research outside of just like putting the series together. Kind of looking back on this, and I know one of the things that you mentioned in, I think at the beginning, maybe the first 10 panels, the first group of the series, you said that this was important, that this was something that you created as a way to not demonize or assign guilt or shame or pity, but rather empathy and remembrance. And, when we consider that, firstly, I want to say that that's one of the reasons why I feel like it's important to talk about these things, because I think it's very easy for people to demonize others who are trying to spread truth about our history as unpatriotic or pot stirrers. And I love this country, and just as I am trying to improve on myself as an individual, I must look at my shadows in order for me to emerge as a better person moving forward. And because I love my country and I love humanity, I think it's important to shed a light on these things. And I know Dameon is very much like that as well. Dameon is one of the sweetest guys I've known, for 20 plus years, right? And I'm sure if Josh is a friend of Dameon's, you're the same way. And all that being said, I wonder why you feel that this incident was covered up for so long, particularly considering that there have been many, many stories that have been very horrific in our history that have emerged over the decades. Why do you think this one has been hidden for so long when it's so significant?
We wonder that, and with the research that we did with it, you have two sides. You have a lot of the Caucasians of today that feel shame, or it's more of they feel horrible about the sins of the past, or you have some folks that feel like, yeah, it definitely happened, it was horrible, but we really don't want to have to pay out anything. So we may not, as horrible as it was, what could you do? It sucks. But you have a lot of shame on that side, or guilt there with some folks. And on the black side of things, it seemed that there was a constant fear of it happening. It happened once. It can happen again at any point in time. A lot of folks felt like they had very little warning. So that taught them a valuable lesson. And the thing is, it was traumatic. And when you deal with something like this, you just don't know the layers of damage. It took 15 years to build Greenwood into what it became. And as you saw, a matter of hours, really, to just bring it all down. That taught them a valuable lesson that maybe, we shouldn't either flaunt what we have, or you should just you should be more fearful than you were. And that was enough between those folks that were afraid and the other folks that felt guilt for something to take so many years. And the thing is, we also saw that somebody spoke about it. It was a white man that spoke about it and did the research. It was in the early 70s, where he tried to publish an article. And even with him, he was getting death threats. And, and that was in the 70s, and it was still a ways away from the event. But even then, folks felt like, you know what, we don't want to stir anything up. You just leave it alone. And with an attitude like that, and with so many feelings about it, I guess it something like this is not surprising to see. It's unfortunate, but not surprising. Yeah. It's sad that there are so many others that some we know of, but many we've never heard of.
Yeah, and I think there was a matter too of, we got into it a little bit, but a lot of it was the white community was putting blame on the black community early on and calling it a race riot. I look at things economically too, just because like a race riot has a 2-year statute of limitations, whereas a massacre there's no statute of limitations, so they could be tried at any point. So it's kind of like this skirmish. We're not going to talk about that too. I mean, in addition to what Dameon was saying, just because the more the truth got out, the more you would learn that it was clearly a one-sided incident.
Right. Yeah, I'm sure they had very savvy attorneys who were very clear on the language that needed to be put out there so that was the case.
Yeah.
Yeah. Any interesting artifacts or just facts in general that you didn't know about that you just thought were particularly outstanding about this particular incident?
I was truly surprised to see how, of course, you're going to have all these businesses around you, and you're going to have all these different professionals, and the number of lawyers they had, doctors. It was middle to high class throughout that whole area, and this is something that we're simply not taught. There is a narrative to paint a lot of people as, not high achievers or whatever the situation, when in fact you had folks there that felt like, well, you know what, we're not going to get from the white community, so we have to do for ourselves. Yeah. And you still end up with a lot of folks that claim that these same people are capable of achievements like this, and they're always asking for handouts and whatnot. Well, when you actually do for yourself, then you're still attacked, for what you gained, for what you did, for yourself. And it's just crazy to believe that there was a place like that was just with so much money flowing through it. It's truly hard to believe, and it's sad that as a black male, I'm saying that as if people that look like me aren't capable. Of course they are, but we're simply not taught or shown examples. Those examples are out there, but a lot of people work to bury them. So, it's just dealing with that reality real time. That was kind of mind-bending to me.
Yeah. How about you, Josh? Just so, obviously this is an audio, it's a podcast, but Josh is a white man. I mean, did you, if you would like, I'd love to hear kind of your perspective as a collaborator on this project, coming from, the perspective of a white person.
Yeah, I think it's so important, these types of stories, because it didn't happen all that long ago. I mean, there are 3 people still alive that were there, which is just mind-blowing because it's 100 years old, but it didn't happen all that long ago. And so often, I've learned so much in the last several years about the laws that were passed post-emancipation of slaves, and just understanding our country and its resistance against the black community consistently over time. Because I naively thought, Abraham Lincoln freed the slaves, Civil War solved that. There were still some issues. We had Jim Crow, but then, civil rights, it's over. And that's not the whole story. That's a very naive view of American history. And so you kind of have to... That
still does go on today, by the way. There are a lot of people who think that racism doesn't exist anymore.
Right, absolutely. And I think that's why you have to go and talk about these stories, talk even about post-civil rights, what's happened. So I was really, with Greenwood, I mean, like Dameon said, just amazed that there was that example of black excellence and black wealth in this country at that time, that it was unhindered in a lot of ways. But then I was just really amazed that they banded together, and like under threat of, I mean, many folks got arrested for having to rebuild, and then they got let go, and then they went right back to just building with the materials that they had. And it was through sheer courage and resiliency that they were able to build that back. So that really, really impressed me. And just like the legal battle and the resource, you know, how they found resources, all of that was really, really impressive. But and I think that's, you know, why Dameon and I started talking about doing something like this. Is like, I think this is such a, racism in America is such a obviously still ongoing, and that we're going to lock arms as a white man and a black man, and we're going to tell these stories together. I think that's just so vitally important, because I've learned a lot from white friends who've spoken up about this. So, you know, you can hear from one community, but when you hear from both, I think there's a lot more power to it.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think it's so important too to find those commonalities too. I mean, and I think that in general, we have more in common than we don't. It's just
absolutely
going back to what I was mentioning earlier, which is, you know, this country is fantastic in the sense that they call it America, or the United States of America, the great experiment, right? The melting pot. Mm-hmm. And we face these challenges probably more than any other country because we are such a melting pot. And because we have fought for so long for this idea of what freedom is, right? The freedom to be able to do and be whoever we are, to do whatever we want and be as free to be what we are and exist, right? Because of that, we have so many different personalities and cultures, and it's a challenge. I mean, I think we should just own up to the fact that it's a beautiful challenge that as humanity that we face to in this country in particular, because of the blend of cultures and such. So it's really amazing. Now to, you know, I want to be conscious of our time here, but, you know, what is sort of your takeaway as artists working on this project in particular? What do you hope people will get out of this? And what do you hope you guys get out of this moving forward? Let's start with you, Josh.
Yeah. I mean, like anything during the project, I mean, it's a dark subject, so just having someone else there with you. I mean, there were moments where I just hit a creative wall, and I'm like, I don't want to illustrate this. I don't want to write about this. It's hard. I mean, I knew that I had to. It was something that we had to do, but, you know, being able to talk with Dameon, you know, there's sometimes like, hey, you got time to talk tonight? And then we would just like all fired up at the end. So just being able to have a collaborator who can help share the workload, that there's, you know, strength in numbers, there's, you know, we're better together, all that fun stuff. But then I think moving forward, it would be great. I mean, we've talked about that we're not done. You know, we want to continue to amplify those moments of history that, you know, a lot of people are familiar with the, you know, what's been taught in school, American history, but how do we go that next layer deeper? And so there's lots of areas we've talked about going. So I don't think we're done. It's just figuring out, how do we do this better? How do we, you know, what topics
expand
do we
on
actually, how do we expand on it? That sort of thing. So,
yeah. How about you, Dameon?
Everything Josh said. I mean, cause you know, it was our first time out. We tried a couple of things. For the most part, I have to say that, you know, we hit it the first time for many things, because we were just trying to see what was going to work, and we decided on the style fairly quickly and went with it. You know what? I hope we encourage other folks to consider collaboration. Truly, it's more than the word. Just have somebody to bounce ideas off of, and you know, where we have our storyboards and we're going over our copy, and it made the whole experience. It was awesome, honestly. We still had a small window, small enough to where we were cranking stuff out even towards the end and editing and whatnot. But it's good to have somebody. I hope that other people come out and they tackle history themselves. But if they feel like, you know what, I want to pair with somebody, hopefully somebody different than me, so we can bounce ideas off and kind of see your point of view and whatnot. You could get so much farther that way, so much further. So yeah, I hope we inspired folks to dig into history a little bit more. Do your own research. You don't have to go and post stuff on Instagram, but see for yourself what this country or what this world is all about. And if you do want to do a project like this, then you know what? Connect with somebody. Ask them their thought about it, and if they can work with you or you can work with them, all the better.
Yeah, that's one of the beauties of 2021 as well, is that we've got so many ways to get the word out, to be expressive about these types of things too, whether it's social media, self-published books, pitching things for YouTube, YouTube series, et cetera, et cetera. So there's definitely lots of ways to express that part of you. So I definitely encourage that to everybody listening. Guys, I really, really appreciate you guys taking the time not only to speak with me for a little while, but also taking the time to shine a light on a pretty dark period in our history, in hopes that maybe this never ever happens again. So thank you guys for being illustrators and using your talents to get the word out there in such a beautiful way. So all right, I think that's about it. Again, you guys can find them. You can find them and also the series at Dameon _Williams. That's DAMEON_Williams. And at Josh J. Lewis, LEWIS. Gentlemen, I really appreciate your time, and can't wait to see what you guys do next. All right.
Thank you, Mike. Appreciate the opportunity, man. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Take care.
Thank you.
Have a good one.
All right, everybody. Thank you so much for listening to the Pencil Pushers Podcast. Follow us on Instagram at the Pencil Pushers Podcast for visual representation of our guest artwork, topics discussed, and anything else that contributes to the show. So be sure to subscribe. Tell a friend. Tell lots and lots of friends. Become a leadhead. And we're out.